Welcome to Chapter 4 of The Bark-Covered House by William Knowlin. Again, this is Michigan in the 1830s, Pioneer, Michigan. And we're right up by Detroit. It's kind of amazing to read a story about something that a place that's probably fairly urban now and at the time was pretty deep frontier. This is Chapter 4, our second house and first apple trees. Father said he would get us some apple trees. He had heard that there was a small nursery below Dearbornville. One morning, he and I started for the village, and from there we went to Mr. McVeigh's, about 2 miles east near the Rouge. Of him, Father bought 13 apple trees, did them up in 2 bundles. His was large, mine small, and we took them on our shoulders and started home through the woods, thus saving 2 miles travel. On our way, we explored woods we'd never seen before. We planted the apple trees on the west end of the little ridge. They are now old trees. I passed them the other day and thought of the time that we set them. Now some of them looked as if they were dying with old age. I counted and found that some of them were gone. I thought there was no one but me who could tell how and when those trees were planted, as they are nearly 40 years old. East of those trees, Father built his second house in 1836. He made the body of this house of large whitewood logs, probably tulip, split oak shakes with which to cover it, and dug a well east of the house. And into this well he put the shell of a large buttonwood log, which we call it a gum. I think a sycamore tree. It was said that the water would not taste of buttonwood. We had very good water there. Father borrowed Mr. Traverse's cart, loaded up our things, and we were glad to leave our bark-covered house, clay dooryard, and Mr. Pardy's woods, to which we had lived so near, and that we could see the sun only for a short time in the afternoon. In the house we were leaving, we had some unwelcome visitors, an Indian, John Williams, and a snake. One day towards evening, Mother was getting supper, and as the floorboards were laid down loosely, they would shake as she walked across the floor. Some members of the family heard a strange noise, something rattling, which seemed to come from a chest that stood in the back part of the room on legs about 6 inches high. Every time Mother stepped on the board upon which he was coiled, his snake's hip felt insulted, and he would rattle to let them know that he was there and felt indignant at being disturbed. Mother said they all tried to find out what it was, and they finally looked under the chest, and there, to their astonishment, they saw a large black rattlesnake all curled up, watching their movements, and ready with his poisonous fangs to strike anyone who came within his reach. He was an interloper, a little too bold. He had, however, gotten into the wrong place and was killed in the room. He had no doubt crawled up through a hole in the floor at the end of a board. The children were very much alarmed, and Mother was frightened. She said that she thought it was a terrible place where poisonous reptiles would crawl into the house. Near the house sometimes, after Brother John S. and Sister Sarah were out raking up some scattered hay. I suppose Sister was out for the sake of being out, or for her own amusement. While she was raking, she saw a large blue racer close by her, with his head up nearly as high as her own, looking at her and not seeming inclined to leave her. I never heard of a blue racer hurting anyone, and this was the only one I ever heard that made the attempt. Sister was greatly scared and hallooed and screamed as if struck with terror. Brother John S. then a little way off, ran to her as quickly as possible. While he was running, the snake circled around her but a few feet off and seemed determined to attack her. Though Brother was the younger of the two, his courage was good, and with the handle of his pitchfork he struck the snake across the back, a little below the head, and wounded him. Then he succeeded in sticking the tine of the pitchfork through the snake's head. At that, Sister Sarah took courage and tried with her rake to help Brother in the combat. As she held up the handle, the snake wound himself around it so tightly that he did not loosen his coils until he was dead. That snake measured 6 and 7 feet in length. We knew nothing of this species of reptile till we came to Michigan. I have killed a great many of them, but have found that if one gets a rod or two the start, it is impossible to catch him. I well recollect having run after them across our clearing when we first settled. They would go like a streak of blue ahead. I make this statement of the reptiles so that the people of Wayne County or Michigan, who have no knowledge of such things, may know something about the vexations and fearful annoyances that we had to contend with after we settled in Michigan. We were all pleased when we got into the new house. We had a dooryard, and lived near the center of our place. East of this house on the little ridge we raised our first patch of watermelons in Michigan. Father said they raised good melons on Long Island, where it was sandy soil, and he thought he could raise good ones there. He tried, and it proved to be a success. The melons were excellent, and when they were ripe, Father borrowed the cart, picked a load of melons, and just before sundown started for Detroit. Mother and my little Michigan sister, Abby, went with us. I think it was the first time Mother saw Detroit after she left it, on the morning following her first arrival here. She wished to do some trading, of course. Father and I walked. We took a little hay to feed the oxen on the road, and the next morning we reached Detroit. The little market then stood near where Biddle House now stands, or between that and the river. Father sold his melons to a Frenchman for 1 shilling apiece. The marketmen said it was the first full load of melons ever on Detroit market, for all events. I know it was the first load of melons ever drawn from the town of Dearborn. Mother's youngest sister lived in the city and was at the store of Mr. Cook, or Cook and Burns, where we did some of our trading. Their store was on Jefferson Avenue. Mr. Cook was an eccentric man and had his own way of recommending his goods, and one which made much sport. Auntie called for some calico. Mr. Cook took a piece off the shelf and threw it on the counter, threw up his arms, put his hands higher than his head, and then picked it up again and shook it and said, There, who ever saw the like of that in Michigan? 2 shillings a yard wide, a foot thick, and the colors as firm as the Allegheny Mountains. But an old woman came in who rather beat the clerk. She inquired for cheap calico. The clerk threw down some and told her a price, and she said, Oh, that's too much. I want some cheap. And then the clerk threw down some that looked old and faded, and with a grin, showing her teeth and the white of her eyes not a little, she said, Oh, no, my good Lord, that was made when you were a baby. When Father and Mother had traded all they could afford, it was nearly night, and we all got into the cart and started for home. We got upon the Chicago road opposite where the Grand Trunk Junction now is and stopped. Mother thought she could go no farther, and the oxen were tired. Father went into a log house on the north side of the Chicago road and asked them if they could keep us all night, and they said they would, and we turned in. And they used us first rate and treated us with much respect. And the next morning, after breakfast, we went home. More adventures in frontier Michigan, and this idea of going from your frontier home to the big city of Detroit. Really interesting to hear that she had not been to the city for, probably a year and a half, 2 years. And then she went, and they weren't all that far, but still it took, almost an entire day to do the traveling. Wonderful, wonderful stories from Pioneer, Michigan. I want to thank you for coming along on this journey as we discover what it was like 200 years ago, not quite, in Michigan. I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching.